Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. This is the English translation of the Majlis of Hazrat Maulana Qamar Uzzaman Saheb Damat Barakatuhum, which took place on Monday, the 26th of Rabi'ul Awwal 1446, 30th of September 2024. Hazrat Wala is speaking about this kitab of his, the I'tiraf-e-Dhunub. Allah Ta'ala make the benefits of it, let it be far-reaching. Hazrat Maulana Shah Wasiullah Sahab narrated many of these waqi'at to us. So now we relate a few waqi'at and stories of the pious to you, from which you will gauge the extent of their sincerity. When anything insincere adulterated their deeds, they would perceive it immediately and would be able to differentiate between sincerity and self-ego, ikhlas and nafsaniyat, sincerity and self-ego. Hazrat Maulana Shah Wasiullah Sahab used to take the Amirul Riwayat, and great ulama would come and sit in his majlis. He would read the waqi'at of the Buzurgan-e-Din from there, and then he would add his extra remarks here and there. So the waqi'ah of Hazrat Umar Farooq radiyallahu ta'ala an. The first waqi'ah in this regard is of Hazrat Umar Farooq radiyallahu ta'ala an on the occasion of conquering Bayt al-Maqdis, when the Muslims laid siege to Bayt al-Maqdis during his Khilafat. The residents of the city said, "Call your Khalif." His description is given in our books. As he is described in our books, meaning when the Khalif comes, if he is as described in our books, we will open the gates of our forts without going to war with you and will surrender the city to you. The Muslim army sent a message to Hazrat Umar radiyallahu ta'ala and he departed for Bayt al-Maqdis. At the time of his departure, he was wearing ordinary patched clothes and riding on a camel. On seeing this, the Muslims who were with him said, "You are the leader of the Muslims. You should wear attractive and clean clothes, and you should be riding a horse." Hazrat Umar radiyallahu ta'ala acceded to their request, changed his clothes, and mounted a horse. He had just moved a few feet when he said, "My nafs is feeling elated at these things. Bring back my old clothes and camel. I will proceed with them." He also added, "Nahnu qawmun a'azzana Allahu bil Islam." We are a nation whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala honored through Islam, meaning it is sufficient for us. Saying this, he wore the same old patched clothes, garments, and proceeded on his camel. Allahu Akbar. Allah is the greatest. Dekha aapne, look, Hazrat Umar radiyallahu ta'ala changed his clothes and conveyance when people asked him, but when a change crept in his nafs, because of them, he perceived it immediately. He picked it up and identified the difference once again between ikhlas and nafsaniyat, sincerity and self-ego. Consequently, he changed his clothes and conveyance to the original. The blessings of his sincerity are well known. The fort was conquered. The fort was conquered. Now look at this ikhlas. Hazrat Maulana Shah Wasiullah Sahab, his discussions, all of it were based on ikhlas. Maulana Zahurul Hasan, he was the majaz-e-sohbat of Hazrat Thanvi, and after the demise of Hazrat Thanvi, he made ruju and he struck up his relationship with Hazrat Maulana Shah Wasiullah Sahab. Nevertheless, he came to Fatehpur and he spent time with Hazrat there. And on the day when he was leaving, we took him and we were taking him to the station, bidding him farewell. And at that time, what did he say to us? He said to us that this personality, referring to Hazrat Maulana Shah Wasiullah Saheb, when I met him in Tanabawan, his talks were that of Ikhlas. When he was in Safar, it was that of Ikhlas. When I came here to meet him, it was that of Ikhlas and nothing else. Let's tell you another waqia, an incident, the story of Sayyidina Ali radiyallahu ta'ala an. In his Mathnawi, Maulana Rum rahimahullah relates a story of Hazrat Ali radiyallahu ta'ala an. While waging jihad, on one occasion, he overpowered a non-Muslim, climbed on his chest, and was about to finish him off with his sword. This disrespectful non-Muslim spat on his blessed face. Hazrat Ali radiyallahu ta'ala immediately cast his sword aside and got off his chest. The non-Muslim was astonished and asked him the reason for letting him go. He replied, "When you spat on my face, my nafs became inflamed and my noble character was becoming tainted. My fighting was now a little for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's sake and a little for my self-ego. And it is not permissible to include anyone or anything in Allah's worship. You are a creation of Allah and you belong to Him. You do not belong to me. Thus, I can only do what is permitted by Allah. You are created by Allah, and anything created by Him can only be destroyed by His order. A glass belonging to a friend can only be broken by a rock belonging to the friend. It was solely the barakat, the blessing of Hazrat Ali radiyallahu ta'ala's sincerity which enabled him to control his nafs. The blessing of his sincerity caused the non-Muslim to embrace Islam, who was then instrumental in many of his family members embracing Islam. Now, this was the story of the senior Sahabi, in fact of Amirul Mu'mineen, leader of the believers. The books record many stories of many kings and rulers who possessed such distinguished character with which they could differentiate between their sincerity and self-ego. The book Akhlaq-e-Muhsini relates an incident of one of the Khalifs of Khurasan who issued an order of punishment against a certain criminal. I'm just seeing here, talking about that incident of Hazrat Ali radiyallahu ta'ala, our Hazrat Wala is saying that this could have also happened at that time there when Hazrat Ali radiyallahu ta'ala got off his chest. There was a great danger. He could have actually seen it to be an ideal opportunity and he could have killed Hazrat Ali radiyallahu ta'ala. But what was this all about? It was all about ikhlas. That if I have to die now also, yes, it's on ikhlas. It's on ikhlas. Okay, so let's continue with this story of one of the Khalifs of Khurasan who issued an order of punishment against a certain criminal. The moment the people began lashing the criminal, he began swearing and hurling verbal abuses at the Khalif. He issued an order to stop all punishment and freed him. One of the close associates of the Khalif said, "Hazrat, now was the time to mete out more punishment against this shameless criminal. What was the reason for pardoning and freeing him?" The Khalif replied, "I was disciplining him for Allah's sake. When he began swearing me and hurling abuses at me, my nafs changed and was affected by what he said. I wanted to exact revenge from him, but I did not want to include my nafs in the matter of Allah. This is very far from sincerity. When a person does a dini act and includes a worldly motive to it, he is deprived of its reward. His swearing and verbal abuses enraged me. Consequently, the deed which was for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala became tainted with my personal motives. Once the demand of the nafs becomes obvious, how can the deed remain sincere? It is better to give up an act in which there is no sincerity. Another waqia of a Buzruk, the Ihya ul-Ulum, relates the waqia of a Buzruk who would never engage in futile conversations. He was walking along a riverbank one day when he saw a small boat approaching. The boat had large vats. So he asked the boat people, "What is in the vats?" They replied swiftly, "The king's wine." "You can do whatever you like." He said, "What is in your hands?" They replied, "Fighting sticks." He said, "Give them to me for a short while." They gave it to him, and he began using them to break the vats one after the other. He eventually broke 29 of the 30 vats and left one. The king was informed of this, and he summoned the Buzurg. It is said that he was a tyrant who used to sit on a steel throne with an axe in his hand. He asked the Buzurg, "Did you break the vats?" He replied, "Yes." The king asked, "Who appointed you as a muhtasib, as an inspector?" The Buzurg replied, "The one who made you king." On hearing this, the king lowered his head for a while, and people asked him after some time. So the king now felt ashamed. He lowered his head for a while and asked him after some while, "Okay, tell me, what prompted you to do what you did?" The Buzurg replied, "Nothing except desiring well-being for Amirul Mu'mineen. If I see a snake or a scorpion heading towards the Amirul Mu'mineen, it is my compulsory duty to save him. Likewise, when I saw an item, wine, heading towards Amirul Mu'mineen, which would cause him to be taken to task severely in the year after, my desire for his well-being compelled me to save him from that punishment." On hearing this, the king lowered his head and remained in thought for a long while. He then said, "Okay, tell me one thing. When you were intent on breaking them, why did you not break all of them? Why did you leave one?" The Buzurg replied, "Now that you asked me, I will have to tell you. As long as I was breaking the vats, my heart was in an excellent condition. I was filled with emotions of dislike for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which we say in the terminology, bughz fillah, and desiring good for a fellow mu'min. I was so overpowered by these emotions that if the entire world was filled with wine vats, I would have broken them all. But when I reached the 30th vat, my nafs, my self-ego got the better of me, and I thought to myself, you are so brave with regard to nahi anil munkar, prohibiting evil, that you do not even bother about the king of the time. No sooner this thought entered my heart, I realized that my nafsaniyat, self-ego, has come in, and the lillahiyat, doing something solely for Allah's pleasure has departed, and so I did not break the last vat. The king was much affected by the Buzrug's speech and said, "Very well, I am appointing you as the inspector from today." The Buzrug replied, "Excuse me, but I cannot accept this position, because if you can appoint me to it today, you can remove me from it tomorrow. I do not need it." Saying this, he departed from there and never came to the city for as long as the king was alive. For as long as the king was alive. Now, did you see, by the virtue of their sincerity, the pious elders and the close friends of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala develop a special condition in their hearts through which they can differentiate between nafsaniyat and lillahiyat. I say, since it is necessary to acquire sincerity and compulsory to safeguard one's self, one's nafs from nafsaniyat, it becomes necessary on every Muslim to understand the difference and develop this capability in his heart. This has always been the modus operandi of the Buzrugs. They speak about sincerity and try to develop this quality in their associates. They give waz and bayan about sidq and ikhlas, and they create the very same within their associates. You too will not deny the need for it, because you saw how the fearless worshipper mentioned at the beginning had no dearth for good deeds. So much of good deeds he had done, but what he really lacked was that of sincerity. Now this type of a kayfiyat, here we read about the Buzrug that came in his heart of Nahi Anil Munkar and the well-wishing nature that he had for the king, etc. Now, this is what we should have in the hearts. Now, we come from the madrasa, coming home. Definitely on the way, you'll pass these wedding houses and halls where you would see these processions going, and they pay these people, and they're there with their drums, singing and dancing, etc. What can I tell you about Hazrat Maulana Mohammad Ahmad Saheb? He had such a disgust, severe disgust regarding this singing and dancing. He could just not tolerate it. But listen, if you join them, they will continue. But if you do not join them and you show your disapproval, they would even make that slower, and they may even turn it off. Allah Ta'ala protect us from these sins. Forgive us for these sins. What is it so difficult for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Thereafter, our Hazrat Wala in conclusion then says, Ta'at karna asan, ma'asiyat chodna mushkil. To carry out acts of virtue is easy, and to stay away from the forbidden is difficult. Therefore, when Hazrat Maulana Shah Wasiullah Sahab went to Bombay, he spoke abundantly about looking after the eyes and ears, because there was a great need for it there. He spoke much about it. Hazrat Maulana Hakim Akhtar Sahab also made much discussion, elaborate discussions on this topic. And we should speak about this. Allah Ta'ala give us the tawfiq and the hidayat of acquiring and taking admonition. Allah Ta'ala give us the tawfiq and the hidayat that those works that Hazrat Maulana Shah Wasiullah Sahab, Hazrat Tanvi carried out, Allah give us the tawfiq and the hidayat of making amal on it. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم بحرمة سيد النبي الكريم صلى الله عليه وسلم.